Ciao.
Hello, Alexis. How are you?
Ciao. Stefano, how you doing?
Good, good.
Happy New Year's.
Thank you. You too. That's the very first recording of the year.
Yes, the first recording of 2026. So I thought I would share a dialogue that I sort of put together. It kind of started as a dialogue and ended up being kind of tutorial, but I really made it more as like a tutorial to myself as I'm learning some um, ideas that I'm sure are familiar to millions of people, but were kind of new to me, and just looking at how they translated into fast HTML and solve it. So I'm talking about styled components. Let me share my screen. Do you know much about styled components?
Oh, yeah, something, but I don't want to spoil anything.
All right, yeah, you don't want
Me
to
allow
spoil the
you.
punchline.
There we go.
All right, I'm requesting to share my screen. Let's see if it lets me do it. Okay, and uh, okay, can you see me okay?
Yep.
All right. So I've been taking this course called CSS for JavaScript Developers by a fellow named Josh Como, I think it's how you pronounce his name. I'm not a JavaScript developer, but it seemed like a really good, really well presented course on CSS. I highly recommend it. Um, Part of the reasons I want to take it is because with Fast HTML, we're doing more web development, and that's never something that I've done like day to day as my main thing. And also, I kind of hate CSS. I kind of really hate it. It strikes
I
me
think
as
I
fundamentally,
still can hate it, but yeah, I don't want to say
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, it strikes me as unnecessarily complicated, fundamentally broken. Like, obviously, it's very powerful too, but I feel like if you could like go back in time and tell people how to make CSS, you'd have a lot of advice to them to say, don't do it this way, do it that way instead. Um, which is not the case for all technologies. Some technologies you could go back and say like, you got it right. We're going to add some more stuff because we're going to need it, but this is the right foundation. Whereas CSS would, I feel like the message that you send back in a time capsule would be something like, you're about to waste like millions of hours of human time by creating this thing that's like way harder than it needs to be. Um, so when you find like a really good presentation of ideas for a thing that you have a difficult relationship to, it's good because it can change your feeling, and that's why I like this course. And one of the particular ideas here that it talks about, very basic, is the idea of styled components. Here you can see I'm in module 3 of Josh's course,
Gotcha.
and in this example, he's working through building just a small bundle of web content that you'd use to present a quotation. So here's a quotation supposedly from Bill Gates. I don't know if it's visible.
Yep.
640 kilobytes of memory ought to be enough for anyone. But you can see that the quote's in this nice little gray box. It's got rounded corners. There's Bill Gates himself. There's a M dash. It's right aligned. It's italicized. There's all these sort of typographic and design elements. And Josh's course is about how you do things in CSS with the idea that you're probably writing React code because you're a JavaScript developer. So I hope he doesn't mind that I'm showing this because this is a paid course. But I'm also advertising this course, Josh. So please don't get angry at me if you
Yeah,
ever
but
watch this.
in general, I think that having someone suggesting you some good book, some good course, it's really, really an important thing because
And this is a
it's so
fantastic course.
you're
The
gonna
point is,
waste a lot of
yeah,
time
yeah,
in
yeah,
finding the
yeah,
right courses that thank you. I will check it out. Seriously, check
yeah,
it
yeah.
out.
Because there's so much material. Like finding the good stuff is the hard stuff. But just to point out the pattern here, first in JavaScript, and then I'll look at how it translated into fast HTML. Uh, you don't just say, hey, I'm building this out of italics and a div and a span and like this gook, 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 gook. Instead, you kind of define higher level semantic units, like the kind of unit that you'd want to find if you were using a thing to build a page. So you're defining a unit called quote here, and the quote is going to contain the different parts. So there's the quote content, which is like any HTML that you stick in here, like this sentence supposedly from Bill Gates. And then there's also the author, like the name of the person who produced the code, and it's a hyperlink too. So there's like it's called a source link. So these aren't normal HTML tags. That's the first
Yeah,
point
like
to
a
observe.
sort of mimic interpolating
Yeah,
string,
they're
but with syntax
they're
highlighting and stuff. Yeah.
they have the sort of syntax that's familiar from HTML tags with the pointed brackets, but they're capitals because they're things that we're like defining ourselves. just for this specific function. And uh, then we're, building the quote out of these other ones we make up. And then here you can see how there's CSS that actually defines how it works. So this quote element is, actually, if you look in the web inspector, going to turn into all this HTML. But something like this quote content element is actually going to turn into a block quote. So it's all going to turn into HTML, but this gives you this other layer on top.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, that was just an interesting pattern for me to see. Um, and and like one other aspect of it to note here is that this CSS that's here only applies in here. You don't need to worry about it leaking out and messing up other things.
Yeah, like that's the really important content, like a topic like the containment, the scope
Yeah.
of your modification. You talk about this maybe even in the last episode about when you were
Yeah,
talking
no, in the
about
last episode
iframe.
we were talking about it, and I've got a upcoming
Yes,
like deeper lesson on it. But this idea, I call it protection of like protecting one piece of web
correct.
content from another piece of web content. I think in that example I talked about how to do rendering of graphics, I needed to protect the graphics element from the notebook. And this is kind of protection working in the other direction. Like create this, if you create this thing in the right way, then it's protected for then the rest of the page is protected from it because you don't have to worry
Y-
about this stuff affecting
You
other
don't want to
things.
injecting this component to break something else. So
Yeah.
otherwise, like
And to be clear, this doesn't require um, weird special magic. Like CSS gives you the tools to do this, but CSS also gives you the tools to not do it. And that's what's hard about CSS. It's not that it doesn't have enough, it's that it has too much and some of the wrong thing. It's kind of like in my mind, like in my basement, I have a toolbox with like tools in it. And there's like a needle nose plier, there's like a hammer. And if I reach in, I grab something, it's probably a tool. I think CSS is like a toolbox where there's a needle nose plier, there's a hammer, and then there's just like a bunch of rusty razor blades at the bottom too. And you can just stick your hand in and come out bleeding. And then like you walk around, and there's people out there who are like, I love CSS. I've got my rusty razor blade. I use it to cut
you
everything. And
get
you're like,
a
and
great image. I'm feeling the pain
no,
of
that's first
touching
of
the
all,
razor
don't put
blade
your
now.
hand in there. Don't put your hand in there. Don't just shove your hand in there. There's terrible stuff in there. And then don't use that. Like you use the knife. Don't use the rusty razor. Anyway, let me show how I did it in FastHTML. That's a lot of wind up. But I think this shows the basic structure, and it actually turns out to be like super simple in
Okay,
FastHTML.
so like your goal now is to try to take that pattern that you see in the specific CSS course and moving it into like SolveIt style exploration and thing.
Yeah. So my goal is exactly reproduce this pattern, which was taught in a course on CSS for JavaScript developers, but doing it CSS for fast HTML developers, and just seeing how it translates, and also sort of figuring out is it worth doing? I think that's also a question. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, as they taught us in Jurassic Park. Similar principle. Um, so what do we got here? Yeah, so here I kind of walk through. This is the target. We want to render something like this, and we want something like this to render. Now we're in fast HTML world. When you write something like this, right? You're just gonna have a capital letter because you're marking your own component. Q for quote. Thank you for.
Oh yeah, the
There we
parentheses.
go. I gotta fix that.
You
Don't
say
want.
you want to have some sort of like abstraction to
Right.
pack
Right.
all the
The idea is like
complexity and leave it
imagine you
out
were
only
making.
the nudge and stuff that you want
Yeah.
to customize.
So we're big fans of Jocko Willink in my house, and imagine we were making a web page. He's this like American motivational speaker, commando, Navy SEAL guy. My daughter's laughing now, but imagine you had a page that had like hundreds of quotes of Jocko Willink. Say like, "You're feeling it sucks. Good. The suck will make you stronger." Imagine you had like lots of Jocko Willink quotes in a pile.
Yeah,
But
I'm missing this bit of American culture, but it's okay.
oh, Jocko. Well, we can talk about that later. Just look up yeah. Look up Jocko Willink. He's a phenomenon. But you'd want to have a quote component that made it very easy to like just render a lot of these things. And when you just want to only think, okay, I've got a quote here. You don't want to be thinking about how it's built every time. You don't want to be spitting it out. So this is what you want. And actually, this is what FastHTML gives you. With FastHTML, when you define a function, the function is the form of abstraction that represents the HTML element. So we can see it right here. We start with what are actually functions that represent HTML elements: site, anchor, block quote, figure, caption. And we know we're going to aim for this structure that we saw in
Mm.
Josh's excellent course. Um, and then turning it in fast HTML, uh, when we define our own elements, we're really just defining functions. Functions are a basic form of abstraction here. So we know that a quote content is going to be a kind of block quote with stuff in it. And we know an author is going to be a kind of site element, um, where site comes from HTML, but author is something we define. And source link, something we define, is going to actually be implemented as an anchor element from HTML. So just defining these functions is doing the part of the work that is done here using the
Okay.
styled components library in
Yeah,
JS,
you
where you say
like
an
it translated
author.
them
Yeah,
into the yeah.
yeah.
Oh my
So
God.
we creating a
We're
custom
5
element.
minutes. We're 10 minutes now. All right.
Okay, well,
Yeah, we gotta run.
it's good. It's just a simple idea. It'll only take 5 minutes to finish. That the author element here is like actually a site element under the hood, and the source element is actually an anchor element under the hood. Um, so now we can reproduce the whole structure. There's the quote, and it's
Mm.
going to return a figure that contains a quote content, that contains a fig caption, that contains an author, that contains a source link. Um, and so if I call the function right now and view it, there's the content, but I haven't done the styling yet. I haven't done the part of applying the uh, CSS.
Jesus.
I can look at it and see that the markup is exactly what I'd expect it to be. So I can see what it's translating to under the hood, and that's right. But I want to add styles, and I want the styles to be confined to my elements.
Interesting. Didn't know about that, like that function that grabs an element and transform it into a markdown representation of its HTML content. That's nice.
Oh, yeah. Other way around though, right? It's taking the
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's taking the tags and then highlighting it as XML. Um, so here I'm grabbing the CSS chunks exactly as just literally copy pasting it from Josh's course. And here I'm modifying the definition. So now I'm passing in style equals and then the string for the styles for that element at each time. So the author element gets the style for the author styles. The source link element gets the style for the source link styles. And now, when I refine my function and call it using these new definitions, you see we've got a rendering that's like what we're aiming for, pretty much. It actually looks just right here, but if I change my browser, it would look different because this is still being affected by notebook styles. So I could wrap it in an iframe, although in this case, it doesn't look different. You'd notice this if we say went to the, say, theme. I think this might produce
Okay.
the, yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
so now you
I
can see
gotcha.
how without protection, this thing is totally messed up by the browser environment. But if I turn on iframe equals 2 to protect my component from the browser environment, then
It's like a
I
blank slate with my component instead of having like
yeah,
an existing canvas with all the things.
then I'm working in a cleaner environment. And now if I look at the raw HTML, it's exactly what you'd expect. There's figure, there's block quote, and then there's the style attribute, and my style gets inserted. So you might think you're done here, but we're not really done because we haven't actually applied all of the CSS that's in Josh's example. If you look here, he's got some CSS which uses this little ampersand friend. Um,
Mm,
and here before, and I think these are called pseudo class elements
yeah.
or pseudo elements. So this is a pseudo element selector. And what this does is it uses CSS to insert the quotation mark and the dash. Um, and if you go look in the CSS spec, you find that you're not actually allowed to use these. There's nothing in the spec that requires browsers to support that for the style attribute. So if we just put that into the CSS like this, which was, to be
Mm,
frank, the first thing I tried to
yeah.
do, it doesn't work. You see, there's no quotation marks there. It's not
You
actually,
were inlining, like I see the bottom cell. You were inlining the style in the component itself, and you cannot use that
yeah,
syntax.
yeah, it just doesn't work. The browser doesn't support that.
Yeah, we're good.
And you can see that it's getting in there. It's getting in there, but mangled. But even if it were unmangled, it still would not work because this is a limitation in what browsers do with CSS. So what we need is a way to still be able to use maybe not the full language of CSS, but at least that attribute, but still having it automatically scoped, to automatically contained in just the component. So what I did, which I suppose must be similar to what this JavaScript style component library does, is I created a sort of miniature CSS preprocessor here. Um, if you look at the markup, it's probably easier than looking at the code. So let me just show you what it actually does. What it actually does here when you look up the markup is instead of it actually creates a whole style tag and puts the CSS in there for the first time. And you're allowed to do this because you can stick a style tag in anywhere. I didn't know that. I thought you only could put it in head. So it shows how little I know about the web. Um, and in my style tag, I have unique identifiers. So this is the identifier for quote, and then I think this is the identifier for author, and this must be the identifier for maybe like quote content. And I know these are unique identifiers because I used the UU because they're UUIDs, which are
You ready?
uh, by definition unique, at least for our lifetime in this universe. Um, and then now I'm uh, every one of these elements, I'm giving it an ID so that the CSS, attaches to it. And that's all that's going on in this code here. Here you can see I have the
Wait.
different. Mhm.
Okay.
So I have the different styles, style for the quote, style for the author, style for the source link. And then and there's three of them. And then I'm generating three IDs at random. I'm only
So let's
referring
say
just,
you're actually generating those IDs every time you run the function. So it's
I
not
am, yeah.
once, it's every time you run the function. So
Well,
every time those style
An
are,
ID is supposed to be unique, right? So I don't know if it needs I think you would need to do it this way. Maybe not because of the way that where the style tag is. But if you had like 100 quotes on a page, you wouldn't want um you want the components to be completely isolated from each other. Like let's say you had two versions of this quote component and one was the emphatic and the other was the less emphatic. You wouldn't want the style from one leaking into the other. So by making the
yeah,
IDs unique throughout planet Earth, like you don't have to worry about it. They're not only going to be unique like within your page, they're going to be unique through all of time. So that solves that
right.
conversation. So I create my three IDs, and then here I'm building CSS rules. So the rule for targeting an ID is hash, and then the ID, and then curly brackets around your rules. Um, and uh, then I am going through that for every one of the IDs I have and for every one of the rules. So that's a tuple there.
Yep, you zip them.
Um, and then I zip them together. That gives me a list of the tuples, and this lets me build my rules. And then this string, CSS, I'm just putting new lines in there so it's a little more readable. But that's what that bit of Python is what generates this bit of like CSS right there. Um, and then here manually, I'm, you know, exploiting the fact that I know which one's which. So quote content, that's the zeroth element of style. So that goes for the quote content element. And author is the uh, index ID two
Yeah.
element. Oh, sorry, that's source link is the index ID two element, and then author is ID one. So now we have the whole thing. We have our self-contained uh, component, which is not going to affect other things. And because we're using iframe equals true, we know other things aren't going to affect it. So if we were developing it here in a very controlled way, we can understand rendering. Um, and that was my little adventure with style components. And I think this is probably a very basic concept, but good for me. And I feel like it's the way I like to work. I like to keep things separate. And I think there's probably like lots of better ways to do this. Like I think there's maybe features of CSS that I'm not aware of that could do this more
Yeah.
automatically. But one step at a
Yeah,
time.
you can always do better, but like maybe a lot of people use this every other day in libraries that does this behind the scene, but never really have like their hands dirty and how this works. So you just
Yeah.
expose the fundamental, like the way you random give a new name that never collided with anything else, so you're gonna break anything by definition and stuff like that. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's interesting.
But one thing about FastHTML is that it really puts you in direct contact with HTML because it's just a wrapper for it. So there's not a lot of abstraction in the way. You're not like signing up for a React component and then, half a year later wondering exactly what a React component is. Like it's HTML and it looks like HTML. It's just a different
Yeah.
Python syntax. So I think to use it well, or for me to use it in a way that I'm happy with, I need to understand what's necessary to use HTML in a way I'm happy with, which means I need to understand what people do who
Yeah.
work with HTML every day and how they do things like make CSS manageable. So that's what led me down this road and led me down this little adventure. I think we're probably past 15 minutes, aren't we?
Yeah, just a little bit.
All right. Well, we got to finish then right now. Until next time.
Okay, cool. Bye, Alexis. See you next time.
Okay. Bye. Ciao.